Chapter 25. When Roderick and Dr. Edwarfen returned to the camp, they found Edric most impatiently awaiting their arrival. He was too much agitated to speak, and the worthy doctor found all his trouble was amply repaid by the interest his friends took in its welfare. Whilst Dr. Entwerfen was employed in relating his adventures to Edric, Roderick was occupied by a task far more difficult and important than he had ever yet undertaken, that of organizing and providing for a disorderly magnitude that had thronged into his camp from the city. Their number was immense. Men, women, and children crowded round the deliverer, falling upon their knees, blessing him and kissing the edge of his garments. Roderick was affected even to tears. "For heaven's sake, my good friends," he said, "spare me. I have done but my duty. I have been but a humble instrument in the hands of Providence. Address your thanks to him. They are their due." Roderick, however, was quite aware that it was not enough to have saved these poor people, for he knew that he must do something to provide them with food and lodging, and that if he did not, when the first moment of enthusiasm should be past, unpleasant scenes must inevitably take place. He accordingly made dispositions to this effect, with a prudence and sagacity that would have done credit to far more advanced years. Temporary huts were erected until the streets of Seville could be cleared of the ruins that encumbered them, and the houses in some measure repaired. Shelter for the inhabitants thus being provided, Roderick harangued the magistrates, directing them to take the people under their direction. The sapient ministers of justice gladly gave him possession of the town, which Roderick was too generous to assume without their permission, and acknowledged themselves and the garrison prisoners of war. The peasants, when they found the kindness of which the citizens had been treated, flocked in with provisions, and the camp and the Irish monarch soon resembled an immense fair. Alexis had followed his master during the whole of these arrangements, and had frequently sighed deeply with as proceeded. "What is the matter with the boy?" said Roderick in one of these moments. "I cannot imagine why he looks so melancholy." The boy enthusiastically clapped his hands together, looking up to the heaven, though murmuring an inward prayer. "What can this mean?" exclaimed Roderick with astonishment. The boy took his master's hand, pressing it first to his lips, and then vehemently to his heart, and knelt before him, reverently bending his forehead to the earth. The next moment, however, offers entering the attention of Roderick was diverted, and Alexis forgotten. In the meantime, M. de Mallet and his daughter, who had been exceedingly agitated by the events of the day, thought not of repose, but sat in the tent prepared for them, conversing upon the merits of the deliverers. "I never saw a finer countenance," said M. de Mallet. "So noble, so animated, and yet so good." "Good indeed," ejaculated his daughter. "Surely we must believe a superior spirit would ever descend upon earth. Such would be the form he would assume." "And how kindly he spoke, and how considerately!" exclaimed her father. "How attentive he seemed, and how delicate!" "Such a majestic figure!
Such a graceful manner!"
It is so rare to find such condensation in so great a monarch."
"Monarch!" cried Pauline. "Were you speaking of Roderick, father?"
"And whom were you speaking of, child?" returned her father, turning quickly around, fixing his eyes upon her.
Of Mr. Montague, father,"
replied Pauline, casting down her eyes and blushing deeply. "Pauline!" said M. de Mallet. She started at the sound of her father's voice and looked timidly up at his face. "Pauline," repeated he, "my dear child, beware." At this moment a roar of cannon shook the tent, and the sound echoed at the walls of the town, leaping from hill to hill in lengthened peals. Pauline sunk upon her knees, hiding her face in her father's lap. "My child, my beloved child!" cried M. de Mallet, bending over her as though to shield her from danger. "Heaven defend thee!" In this painful situation, the father and daughter continued until the cannonade ceased, and all was still, and awful was the calm that succeeded in such a tumult. Pauline raised her head and looked fearfully round. "Come, my child," said her father, "let us endeavor to ascertain who are the victors." Pauline rose from her knees and, leaning on her father's arm, accompanied him into the opening of the tent. But she shrunk back, shuddering at the horrid scene that presented itself. Their tent was situated at the extreme edge of the camp and commanded a view of the whole field of battle where the combat from the morning had taken place. The plain that stretched to their left lay covered with bodies of the dying and the dead, whilst multitudes of horses, broken loose, galloped over the field, plunging, snorting, and crushing beneath their hooves the bodies of their fallen riders. In some places the branches of half-broken trees strewed the ground, whilst their mutilated trunks, perforated with shot, remained as melancholy relics of their former beauty. The swords and helmets mingled with overturned wagons, and military utensils of all kinds were scattered in wild disorder around. The earth, ploughed up by the cannonballs in deep furrows where the ridges had been beaten flat by the feet of the combatants, looked wild and uneven as the waves of the mighty ocean arrested in a moment of tempest. Blood lay in pools upon the ground, and clotted gore, mingling horribly with remnants of human bones and brains, hung to the still-standing bushes, disfiguring the fair face of nature. Pauline shuddered and turned eagerly to the other side of the landscape which commanded a view of the town. Here still, however, she found nothing but death and war. It was a moment when the explosion of the petard set fire to the wooden bulwark, and Roderick and Edric leaped through the flames upon the beach. The bright glare of the blazing bulwarks relieved strongly their dark figures, and Pauline distinctly saw and recognized them for a moment, though the next they were lost in a cloud of smoke. She screamed and grasped her father's arm in convulsive agony. M. de Mallet was scarcely less agitated than herself, and as the smoke cleared away, they saw distinctly through the flaming volumes Roderick and Edric upon the breach, opposed by a crowd of Spaniards and fighting with inveterate fury.
"Roderick is on his knees," cried M. de Mallet. "But see, he rises suddenly and plunges the Spaniard who had raised his sword to cut him down into the flames."
Pauline did not speak, but she gasped for breath and held her father's arm yet more tightly than before. Edric was now seen grappling hand in hand with the Spaniard, and the fire and smoke closed upon him and hid him from their view. The next instant a tremendous crash was heard, and loud shouts, followed by a rush of men. It was a sortie of the besieged.
"Oh, heavens!"
cried Pauline, turning pale, resting her head upon her father's shoulder.
"War is a dreadful thing."
"You are faint, my child," replied M. de Mallet.
"This is no fitting scene for you. Shall we go in?"
"Oh, no, no," cried Pauline feebly. "I cannot leave this spot." Here the shouts of Roderick, Roderick forever, Roderick in glory, rung in their ears. Pauline shuddered, and a faint sickness crept over her. The scene seemed to swim before her eyes, and she would have fallen but for the supporting arm of her father. At this moment some soldiers, carrying the bier, passed a little distance from the tent. Upon it lay the body of an officer, his head flung back. His long thick hair was matted with gore, and a ghastly wound gaped on his uncovered breast. Pauline could bear no more. She thought it was Edric, and she fell fainting into her father's arms. M. de Mallet bore her back to the tent, and as soon as she was sufficiently recovered to enable him to think of anything but herself, he dispatched one of the soldiers, appointed to attend them, to ascertain if the Irish monarch had escaped. The soldier did not return, and M. de Mallet, too impatient to remain in his tent, sallied forth to learn the news himself. Scarcely was he gone, however, when the soldier's wife, whom he had called to the assistance of Pauline, perceived the town was on fire. Pauline's agitation now became excessive, and she trembled in every limb, and listened till the sense of hearing seemed agony. She could not comprehend the cause of the noise and bustle made by the citizens as they came crowding out of the camp. She looked forward, but the throng of half-naked men, women, and children that came hurrying along seemed inexplicable. She stopped a woman who was half-dressed, who had her clothes tucked in one hand, whilst with the others she led the two half-naked children.
"What's the matter?" asked she. "Roderick!" cried the woman in belief. "God bless noble Roderick!"
"Where are you going?" demanded Pauline and the two young men, who were bearing between them a bed containing the sick father.
"Roderick!" shouted the pious Spaniards. "Heaven in its mercy bless Roderick!"
Pauline was proceeding in her inquiries, though without the smallest hope of receiving a direct reply. the hearts and the minds of the Spaniards being so full of Roderick that no other name could find utterance from their lips when she perceived her father. "My dear father," cried she, running to him, "now I shall know all. What is the matter?"
Roderick, the noble Roderick is safe," repeated M. de Mallet.
Charlene was chagrined. She longed to hear of Edric, and she envied for head's sake the renown of the Irish hero. "Can you, too, speak of nothing but Roderick?" she said, somewhat reproachfully.
"And of whom should else I speak?" replied her father. "Who else deserves to be spoken of? For surely he is the bravest, the noblest of men."
"I do not doubt that," observed Pauline coldly. "Every tongue utters his praise, every breast swells with gratitude of his goodness, and every hand is raised to heaven in prayers on his behalf." "How many persons killed?" asked Pauline.
"How can you ask such a foolish question?" replied her father. "Do you not see the ground heaped with the slain?"
"The persons of note, I mean."
"Let me see. I think they said that there were Generals H and M and Counts L, P, T."
"Oh!" groaned Pauline impatiently.
"And besides, I think they say Mr. Montague is seriously wounded."
"I feared so," sighed Pauline. "He is so brave."
"Yes, everyone says he is brave, but implores blessings upon his name, for he saved the life of Roderick."
Pauline's countenance had beamed with triumph at the commencement of his sentence, but it fell rather at the conclusion. She did not quite like her hero to owe his glory to anyone but himself. M. de Mallet continued,
"His bravery and nobleness of spirit were unequaled. Everyone praises him. There is certainly something very extraordinary in the character of the English. Their daring tempers and love of adventure lead them to quit peace and riches in their native country and to seek glory and distinction elsewhere. This Mr. Montague is really an exalted young man."
Pauline's eyes flashed joy. She felt she loved her father more than ever. She could have embraced him as he spoke, for the praise of Edric sounded as the sweetest music in her ears. Strange that so slight an acquaintance would have produced so strong a passion, but such is so inexplicable of love. Pauline now had patience to hear the explanation of her father representing Roderick. She even felt pressure in the repetition of his exploits, for he was a friend of Edric, and she retired the rest. Happy in herself and contented with all the world, having been first assured by her father that the surgeon confidently expected Edric would soon recover, Pauline, however, would have been very much puzzled to explain the cause of the excessive excitement that she felt. The situation of herself and her father was as hopeless as ever. They were still prisoners in a strange land, without fortune, without friends, but so little does happiness depend upon external circumstances that the breast of Pauline seemed to have been a stranger to it all now. After arranging everything for the comfort of the refugees and his own soldiers, Roderick took a few hours of hurried repose. When he rose in the morning, he sent his compliments to M. de Mallet and his daughter to demand permission to wait upon them. This was instantly and gladly accorded, and in a few minutes the Irish hero was in their tent.
"I console your majesty upon the situation of your friend," said M. de Mallet the moment he saw him. "I hope he is better."
The monarch smiled. He forgave the abruptness of the question in favor for the excellence of the motive, and he replied that Mr. Montague was fast recovering. "He regrets exceedingly," added he, "that it is not in his power to say his devoirs here," bowing to Pauline, "and while I can sympathize with him, I know what he loses." Pauline inquired modestly the particulars of the combat. "Upon my word, madam," replied Roderick, "I know very little about it." "I thought your majesty had been engaged." "That is the very reason. If I had not, the case might have been different. But as it was, I only just saw a great many people that tried to kill me, and a great many that I tried to kill, and the smoke hid the rest."
"A very satisfactory account of the battle, upon my word," cried M. de Mallet, smiling. "But other people saw more of your majesty's acts than you did yourself, and they say you performed prodigies of valor."
"It is very kind of them to say so," said Roderick, "for I am sure it is more than they know." "Your majesty's modesty wishes to throw a veil over your valor," observed Pauline, "but luckily it cannot be concealed." Your praises, madam, would make a man a coxswain, replied the monarch. I own I have not the courage to refuse commendations from your lips. Pauline blushed. She fancied she had said too much, and now remained silent.
I cannot describe how much I admire your Majesty's leniency to the inhabitants of the city, said M. de Mallet. It proves your benevolence is equal to your valor, though indeed it was a sound policy to act as you have done, for by this you have consolated the hearts of the Spaniards. Whereas, if you had exercised any cruelty, they would have risen against you in mass. But this, I dare say, your Majesty considered?
Indeed, replied Roderick, smiling. My Majesty considered such a thing. I only thought as a man. I did not like to see my fellow creatures burnt to death or poniarded if they attempted to escape. I should not have liked it at all, if I had been in a similar situation, and so I did all in my power to save them. That is all I know in the matter. But to change the subject, I have a great favour to ask of you, Mademoiselle de Mallet. What is that? Asked Pauline. Your Majesty has only to speak to be obeyed. Oh, for heaven's sake, do not talk of obedience. It is I who should obey. I only ask a favour, and that is that you will permit me to bring Dr. Entwerfen to kneel at your feet and kiss your fair hand in token of his homage.
I would not advise Pauline to let him kneel, said M. de Mallet, laughing, as I fear if she does there will be some difficulty in getting him back up again.
Your Majesty's commands, said Pauline. Do not talk of commands, interrupted Roderick. I hate the word. Your Majesty's wishes, then, continued Pauline, smiling, shall be complied with. This evening, then, cried the gay monarch, the doctor shall make his appearance. Till then, adieu.
Will your Majesty have the kindness to be present? My best wishes to Mr. Montague for his recovery, requested M. de Mallet.
Certainly, replied Roderick, but I am to tell Edric that Mademoiselle de Mallet has no wishes for his welfare. I wish, I hope, that is, I think, stammered Pauline.
My daughter means her sentiments are exactly similar to my own upon the subject, said M. de Mallet gravely,
for he was not at all pleased with the interpretation he thought the king might put upon the embarrassment of his daughter. Very well, repeated Roderick provokingly. I shall tell Edric that M. de Mallet and his daughter think exactly alike of him. That is it not? M. de Mallet was about to reply when the king, nodding and waving his hand, bade them adieu and hurried away.
I don't know what to make of this Irish hero, said M. de Mallet
the moment he had left them.
With all his good qualities, there is something very strange about him. I don't know what to make of him.
Pauline sighed assent, though she did not know what to make of him very well, for she fancied he saw and ridiculed her partiality for Edric. This idea roused every spark of pride in her nature. She could not bear the thought of being supposed to give her love unsought, and she determined when she next saw Roderick to show her coldness and indifference when Edric is mentioned, how completely he had been deceived. When Roderick left the tent of M. de Mallet and returned to Edric, whom he found pale and feeble, "You are the happiest fellow in existence, Edric," he said. "I would willingly give all my glory, and even my demoniacal renown, that the Spaniards talk about so much, to be able to call up such blushes to the cheek of a beauty your name can arise. Oh, if you had seen Pauline! By heaven, she is the loveliest creature I have ever beheld in my life." As he spoke, Alexis, the Greek page, who had been crouching rather than sitting at the foot of Edric's couch, resting his head upon his hands, and looking absorbed in grief, uttered a faint cry and rushed out of the tent. "There's something very extraordinary about that boy," said Roderick, looking after him. "There is indeed," replied Edric, "and I have something I wish to communicate to you respecting him." And in a few words he related what had passed the preceding night in the tent. "Impossible!" cried Roderick. "You must have been dreaming, Edric. What communication would the boy hold with Alvarez? You know he is dumb. Besides, even if Alvarez were inclined to plot against me, he has prudence and reserve to make a confidant of a beardless boy." "I simply relate the facts as they occurred," said Edric. I do not pretend to explain them, but I can assure you I was neither dreaming nor delirious. It is very strange, repeated Roderick, musing, as it corresponds remarkably with what I have observed myself. For some moments he remained lost in thought, but it was not his gay and joyous nature to suffer anything to depress him long, and the next instant Alexis was forgotten. The fall of Seville and the destruction of the army sent to defend it produced a powerful effect upon the destinies of Spain. The Cortes again sends ambassadors to negotiate with the Irish hero, but taught by experience, he now received them haughtily, refusing to treat them with anything but as a conqueror. And to put his threats in execution, he determined to advance immediately upon Madrid. "We must follow up our victory," he said to Edric, after he had somewhat contemptuously dismissed the deputies from the shattered remnant of their allied army, who came to sue humbly at his feet of peace. "These people are treacherous beyond description. They do not understand leniency, and they must be treated with sword in hand. I am thoroughly tired of them. Their fickleness and uncertainty have disgusted me. I will therefore march to Madrid, establish Don Pedro as their sovereign, and then take my leave of them forever." "I am rejoiced to hear it," exclaimed Edric. "You will then return to Ireland and devote your time to your own subjects." "I will try to satisfy them as well as I can, but as perfection cannot be expected all at once, you must not be surprised if some day I should fly off on a tangent and take it into my head to colonize the moon." Edric laughed. "If you promise to wait till then," he said, "I shall be satisfied." "You may not find my project so wild as it appears," rejoined Roderick. "The moon is a very pretty, mild, modest-looking planet, and I must own I should like amazingly to see what kind of inhabitants she contains. And if I should determine to go there, here is a gentleman who I am sure will quite be ready to accompany me." Dr. Entwerfen entered the tent as he spoke.
"Of what was your Majesty speaking?"
asked he. "Of a voyage to the moon," said Roderick. "Will you go with me?"
"With all my heart!"
cried the little doctor, rubbing his hands and looking all glee at the thought. "There, I thought so," said Roderick, laughing. "I should have thought the many adventures you have met with had cured your passion for traveling," rejoined Edric. "Cured him? Given him zest for it, you mean," replied Roderick. "The appetite for traveling always grows with what it feeds upon, and though the doctor may boast, yet I do not doubt that he is just as eager to explore new places as ever."
"Yes," returned the doctor, "I certainly did see Seville."
"Part of it, my dear fellow, from the palaces to its dungeons," resumed Roderick. "Nay, I believe you were very near being indulged with the view from its ropes." The doctor did not quite relish this raillery.
"I assure you, your Majesty."
"Apropos de bottes," cried Roderick, interrupting him, "I had entirely forgotten I promised to introduce you to Mademoiselle de Mallet. We will go now. Will you accompany us, Edric? I am sorry to ask you to do anything so disagreeable, but I think it will be in the best descent to kiss hands and take leave, and all this sort of thing, before we set out to Madrid. Besides, it may be as well to make some kind of provision as to what to become of them in our absence." "Then you will not take them with you?" said Edric despondently. "Who ever heard of such a thing?" cried Roderick. "How could I possibly ask the lovely Pauline to endure the inconveniences of traveling with a camp? I really have not the assurance to attempt it." Roderick sighed deeply, and his countenance assumed an expression of so much melancholy that Roderick laughed immoderately. "I could not have believed it possible," said he, "that you could ever become such a sighing siphon. The thing's incredible." "The pain of my wounds," said Edric, blushing, for even philosophers don't like being laughed at. "The pain in your heart," repeated Roderick, mocking him. "But come, come, I can pity you. I've been in love at least 50 times myself, so I know how it is." "I am not in love," remonstrated Edric. "Denial is one of the most dangerous symptoms," resumed Roderick, gravely. "Experienced physicians rarely think their patients really ill till they cannot conscious it of themselves. Let me feel your pulse." "Pfft," said Edric impatiently. "Will you go, then?" asked Roderick, laughing, and to avoid further tormenting by his raillery, Edric hastily rose from his couch and declared himself ready to attend him. The injuries he had received, having only been flesh wounds inflicted with a saber, had now nearly healed, and the only change they had produced in his appearance had been to make him look more pale and interesting, one arm being supported by a sling, and a bandeau bound around his forehead. Pauline's eyes sparkled when she saw him, in spite of her intended indifference, and she could not command her voice so entirely, but that its tremulous tone betrayed her inward agitation. Edric's eyes also involuntarily expressed his pleasure, whilst the gay laugh and the arch look from Roderick told that he was perfectly aware of what was passing in each mind. Dr. Entwerfen, however, saw nothing of the kind, his mind being quite absorbed in the delightful contemplation of his own glory. He had been presented to M. de Mallet by Roderick as his friend and counselor, learned and justly celebrated Dr. Entwerfen, and the moment seemed a sufficient reward for a whole life of misery, the doctor's ecstasy upon the occasion being so unbounded that he neither knew what he did nor what he said. Whilst Roderick had been speaking, indeed, he had been a perfect agony, stretching himself out on tiptoe, opening his hand and closing them with every assistance, as though bursting with impatience to speak, that he might by his eloquence confirm the monarch's eloquium, yet trembling at every instant lest he should interrupt it. M. de Maillet had been a dabbler in scientific experiments in his youth, and pleased to find a person whom he could talk to and understand his ideas upon the subject, he drew the doctor on one side, leaving his younger friends to be enthralled by his daughter. "I'm glad, very glad to see you so soon recovered," said Pauline, addressing Edric in a gentle tone. "I feared, that is, my father feared, your wounds were more serious." "You see, Edric," said Roderick archly, "as I said, Mademoiselle de Mallet feels for you exactly the same interest as her father does." "I should be flattered by exciting any interest in so gentle a bosom," sighed Edric, looking at her tenderly. Pauline sighed too, involuntarily, but remained silent. "Do you then feel no interest in my behalf?" continued Edric. "Not even the cold, chilling feeling sanctioned by your father?" "Oh, call not the interest my father feels for you cold and chilling!" exclaimed Pauline with energy. "I'm sure, that is, I think—" And here, fearing she had said too much, she stopped abruptly, totally unable to proceed. "Oh, go on!" exclaimed Edric, gazing earnestly upon her blushing face. "Go on, I could listen to you forever." Pauline trembled, blushing, and hesitated. I, I think I'd better go to my father," stammered she, after a short pause. Roderick smiled. "By all means," he said. "Don't you think so, Edric?" Edric did not reply, for in fact he did not hear the question, whilst poor Pauline's agitated increased, and her color changed rapidly every moment. She dreaded Roderick's raillery, and trembled so violently she could scarcely stand. At this moment her father returned, and looked at his daughter with some surprise, and then, turning to his guests, he apologized for her abstraction.
"My daughter is unused to camps," he said, "and the scenes she has lately gone through have been too much for her nerves."
"She will now have an opportunity to recover herself," replied Roderick. "My army will move forward tomorrow, and if you will accept the post, I will leave you as governor of the city, with a sufficient garrison to keep it on my behalf." Pauline turned deathly pale as he spoke, and every hope of happiness seemed to fly from her breast forever. M. de Mallet, however, was not at all aware of his daughter's anguish, and thanking the king gratefully for the high honor conferred upon him, his fancy began to revel in anticipation of the delights of governorship, and in 10 minutes he had arranged in his mind as many improvements and alterations as it would take 50 years to accomplish. "Farewell," continued Roderick. "I trust we shall meet again, if not here, at least in another and better world. Permit me, lady," he continued slightly, touching with his lips her pallid cheek, Pauline. "Tomorrow with the dawn we advance, and we have so much to do ere then that we must deny ourselves the pleasure of again enjoying your society. Farewell, governor. You will find the necessary papers to install yourself here," giving him a packet, "and the soldiers have orders to obey you as myself. Come, Edric." Edric advanced, and bowing, took the hand of Pauline and pressed it respectfully to his lips. His heart was too full to speak. Pauline could scarcely retain her tears, and shaking hands with the doctor, she hastily retired to a part of the tent and closed for her use.
"My daughter's not well, said M. de Mallet. These scenes of blood and war were too much for her nerves, but she will soon recover when you have left us.
I doubt that, murmured Roderick in a half-whisper, as soon after his friends retired. Edric was not insensible to Pauline's emotion, and he more than suspected the cause, a pleasure unknown before throbbing in his bosom. His eyes sparkled, and his whole appearance presented so complete a contrast to his usual depression that Roderick could not resist the temptation of rallying him to the unmercifully upon it. "Talk of medicine," cried he. "There is no elixir like the magic of a pair of bright eyes. All the physicians in my camp can effect nothing like it. Nay, you need not blush so, Edric. I did not imagine you were so far gone as that."
"I did not blush, that I am aware of," returned Edric, somewhat peevishly, for he did not relish being teased. "At least, I am sure of no occasion for blushing."
"Well, then, don't you look like a bashful maiden disavowing her first attachments with a la pa? How can you think so? I did not suppose you were capable of such affection."
"I am not aware that I have been guilty of any."
"Come, then, own your own truth candidly. You love the Mademoiselle de Madway."
"How can you think so?"
replied Edric, blushing deeply in spite of his efforts to look so composed. "You are indifferent to her, then? Dear me, I had no idea of it. I was never so completely deceived in my life. Oh, well, if that's the case, I will resume my first design in trying my own fortune."
"How can you be so provoking?"
"Why, it is very hard, if you do not love with her yourself, that you should wish to prevent everyone else from being so. Your Majesty's rank, I should think, would prevent your even thinking of Mademoiselle de Mallet." "Why should my rank prevent the possibility of my being happy?"
"Your Majesty's rank prevents the possibility of you marrying Pauline, and I should hope you should not dare to entertain dishonorable views disrespecting her."
"Dare? Dishonor? Do you remember whom you are speaking to, Edric?"
"Perfectly, for I have not forgotten Roderick, though he appears to have forgotten himself."
"Edric, I won't be angry with you. When people are in love, they never mean what they say. In fact, they seldom know what they are talking about. I remember once when I was in love myself." Alexis, who had waited at the entrance of the tent during the visit the master had paid to M. de Mallet, was now following them, sighed heavily at the remark. Roderick heard him. "What is the matter with you, boy?" he said. "Were you ever in love, Alexis?" The page sighed more deeply than before, and crossing his arms upon his breast, bent his head in a token of assent. "It is too much to be lamented you cannot tell us about it," continued Roderick, "for you could never choose a more fitting moment for such a tale. As you may depend upon the sympathy of Mr. Montague, even if I should be so barbarous as to refuse my mine. With pity faults to which we feel inclined, and to our proper failings can be kind, as one of your poets says. Edric, don't you think he's right?"
"I think you are very provoking."
"That is because I am touching upon a string that happens not to be quite in tune, and so no wonder it jars a little. Do you not remember the old proverb, 'Touch a man whose skin is sound, he will stand and fear no wound. Touch a man where he is sore, he will start and bear no more.'"
"Can you condescend to repeat such nonsense?" replied Edric indignantly. "Is it unworthy the poorest beggar in your dominions?"
"And how can you be so consent to be moved to such nonsense, Edric?" replied Roderick, laughing. "Come, come, own the truth, for it is useless to attempt any longer to deny it. Say candidly that you are in love with Mademoiselle de Mallet, and I will tease you no longer."
"And love is too strong a term. I admire, esteem, and respect Mademoiselle de Mandelet. I even think her possessed with 1,000 charms and 1,000 virtues, but as to being in love—"
"Well, well, we will not quarrel about words. I do not think you will ever make a romantic lover. Englishmen are too reasoning and prudent to fall in love violently. Your blood is as cold as your climate. Now, we will take the thing quite differently. With us, love is a devouring flame, a fire that observes our whole being, a stream that sweeps everything before it, a madness, a delirium. In short, I don't know what it is."
"Think not," said Edric dryly.
"Pshaw, pshaw," continued Roderick. If it could be described, it would not be worth feeling. It is all spirit, all soul. If you tie it down to rules, it evaporates. Don't you think so, Grease Celescus? The page bowed, and shaking his head, pressed his finger upon his lips. True, returned his master. I had forgotten, but if you cannot speak, you can write. Take these tablets. I should like to know your opinion. The page took the tablets and wrote with astonishing rapidity. Since your majesty condescends to ask my opinion, I think that the love which can stay no reason, nor hesitates to sacrifice everything to the object loved, does not deserve a name. Bravo, my little hero, cried Roderick, tapping him on the shoulder. Spoken like a true Greek. An Irishman, however, would have said nearly the same. The boy's slender figure trembled in every nerve at his master's touch, and his cheeks were flushed with unwonted passion, though his eyes remained fixed upon the ground, from which indeed he rarely raised them. Roderick gazed upon him a few minutes in silence, as though he wished to read his inmost soul. Then, turning to Dr. Entwerfen, who had taken no part in the last conversation, he demanded gaily what he was thinking about. I was thinking, your majesty, said the doctor gravely, that it is a long way from hence to Madrid, and that it is very fatiguing for young men to march so far. Upon my word, doctor, said Roderick, laughing, you have really made the most sublime discovery, and I perfectly agree with you in the justice of your conclusions. That being granted, continued the doctor, if any means could be devised by our enemy could be transported to the gates of the city without the trouble of walking there, it would be a good thing. Certainly, said the king. The fact does not admit of dispute. The only difficulty is to contrive how it is to be done, resumed the doctor, musing. Aye, there's the rub, said Roderick, laughing immoderately. However, if anyone can do it, I'm sure you can, my dear doctor. So rally your energies and consider the best means of commencing operations. I'm sure, if you exert yourself, you cannot fail of success. Your majesty does me an honor, and I will endeavor to prove I am not undeserving of your confidence you repose in me, said the little doctor, drawing himself up to his full height and puffing out his cheeks, as he walked on absorbed in meditation. I have it, cried he, suddenly stopping his work. What does your majesty think of an immense raft? Excellent, my dear doctor. But I see three objections to making one large enough to convey a whole army. First, that we have neither the timber to make it. Secondly, we have no horses to draw it. And thirdly, the roads are not wide enough to admit it. Balloons would have to do, but we have them not, resumed the doctor, still profoundly cogitating, with his eyes fixed upon the ground and his hands in his breech pockets. What think you of packing soldiers up in bombs and shooting them out of mortars? Asked Andret. Your majesty is pleased to jest, observed the doctor gravely, but ridicule is not an argument. Oh, certainly not, replied the king. And if you mistake me greatly if you thought I meant to ridicule your plan, I only wish to remark that I feared it would be rather difficult to put it into execution. That which can be accomplished without difficulty, said the doctor solemnly, is scarcely worth the trouble of undertaking, and quite below the consideration of a man of genius. Difficulties to a man of science are but incentives to action. Most sensibly observed, my dear doctor, said Roderick. However, we have now reached our tent, and I must leave you to contrive some plan to bring us back to Madrid, as I am afraid I cannot wait now to put your designs into practice to enable us to get there. We must march with dawn. Of course, you will accompany us. Certainly, returned the doctor, still musing, then muttering to himself, I don't much like the plan of shooting off the soldiers. It would take such large mortars and so much gunpowder. However, there's no knowing what might be done. I will think of it. He retired to his tent, though no sleep visited his eyes that night. So completely had the idea of packing up soldiers and bombs taken possession of his imagination. Roderick's arrangements were soon made, for nature had certainly intended him for a general. His intelligent mind foresaw everything, and provided against every contingency. Brave in the field and prudent in council, the only fault of Roderick as a soldier was that he sometimes suffered himself to be carried away by his ardor when it would have been wiser to delay. But his very impetuosity had its charms in the eyes of his soldiers, and he never hesitated to expose himself to the same dangers or to undergo the same privations as themselves, and they would have followed him willingly into the very jaws of destruction. After arranging everything for the morning's march, the Irish hero snatched a few hours of repose. With the dawn, however, the drums beat the reverie, and the Irish army left Andalusia to advance by rapid marches upon Spain.